Hello, how are you today? It is time to talk about the next step in the research process, and that is starting, because at this point, you should have already done things like you've got a general idea of your lit review, you've got a conceptual framework built up from that lit review, you've got questions, you've got a theoretical framework that is going to help you look at your question and your data and results. Um, and so you may or may not have formulated the exact method of data collection and um, analysis, but it's time to start doing those if you haven't done it already. And if you have done it already, it's time to double check your work to make sure you're on the right track. Um, so I am going to now go through the worksheet, and in this case, it is the qualitative worksheet. Qualitative analysis worksheet is the title, and I will share that on the screen here, and we will go through the process of what it's like to fill that out, what I'm expecting. So here you go. Need to scroll up to see the beginning. The qualitative analysis worksheet. And please note that the date on this is July 24, 2017. This is subject to change, which is why I've got a version and a date on there, so that you can always check back in the folder for the class that you're in, which could be 751, 752, 754, which is the dissertation, and see if you've got the most current version. Okay, so now, what is the purpose of the study? You already know you've got a reason for doing what you're doing. It's important to you, and so just give a brief synopsis. None of these blanks are paragraphs. I just want you to quickly write the purpose, why this thing is important, and then you're going to write your qualitative research question. Okay, because this is the qualitative analysis worksheet. And once you've done that, then you can begin to think about the other things, and hopefully by now you have a theoretical framework picked out, and if not, talk with me or other profs to make sure you generate an idea of that. And so usually it's got a name, like Maslow's hierarchy, or social constructivism, or authentic assessment. It's something that's broad and doesn't give you the exact details of what to do. Because the theoretical framework, well, let's go down to the next one. Conceptual framework is the ideas that you want to look at within your research, and that conceptual framework it gives a lot of details, and some of those are prescriptive. The theoretical framework gives you a way of looking at those to give it a deeper meaning. So as you go through methods of implementing effective practices for reading strategies and increasing comprehension, how are those strategies, how can you make sense out of those strategies in light of the social constructivist framework, or whatever framework you've chosen? How do the ideas in the conceptual framework make sense in light of your theoretical framework? So that's the difference in the frameworks. And So you describe it briefly, very briefly. This is a worksheet. This is not a paper. And then how does it inform the questions? Always go back to the questions. It has to be directly tied. All right, now qualitative research type. Sorry. I've listed a few here. There are literally dozens, but these are some of the more common ones. So you don't have to pick one of these. You can pick symbolic interactionism and all kinds of different qualitative traditions, but you have to specify here. You can't just say qualitative research. You have to say phenomenology or grounded theory or a case study using grounded theory or a content analysis, whatever it is that you're doing to come up with data and make sense and interpret, I need to know. So you pick it, you name it in this box, and then you come over to the next box and explain why it makes sense for the study that you're doing. Okay, definitions of key terms for the study is a definition for the key terms for the study. These are the technical jargon which may or may not be understood by your lay reader. And not just for that audience, but for the people who do study it and may be looking at your dissertation, they may have their own idea of what reading comprehension is, and you need to pick a definition for those key terms that fit your study, and then you have to say where you got that definition, because at this stage of your dissertation, you haven't created anything, or you shouldn't have, because the data will lead you to create new things possibly. But at the beginning of the study, you're just using the definitions from other sources. So make sure you include the source. Forms of data. Remember that, okay, if you have one question, you're only going to fill in this first major row. But for each question, there are 3 forms of data. So on question 2, what are your 3 forms of data? Well, you might have interviews, observations, artifacts, focus groups. There's all kinds of data that you could collect. You have to name at least 3 because triangulation. And that's one of the most basic tools to ensure objectivity. So how does it inform the question? One sentence, not a paragraph. And how will this data be collected? Okay, so it is what it is. Shouldn't have to explain that one. Just give very brief details. This worksheet is to make sure you've thought things through, and so you're telling yourself and me that how you've thought it through, so that we know you've got a game plan going into the writing. The proposed analysis methods. Well, if you're going to analyze if you're doing observations, you put observations in the data source. And then when you go to code and reduce, you have to say what you plan on doing. And there's a few good examples out there where they have 3 stages, and in this one I did this, in this one I did this other procedure, and in this one I got it narrowed down all the way. So tell me, don't just say, I'm going to see what emerges and write it down. Give me something procedural enough to where I would at least have a clue as how to begin doing it. And then how will this be informed by the frameworks? It has to be heavily embedded in the conceptual framework. Everything in your coding should be related to the conceptual framework, and you should be able to make sense out of it through the theoretical framework. So you should be able to answer those directly. And the trustworthy techniques, trustworthiness. If you're doing a qualitative study, I want to see, well, everybody should have triangulation. It's part of the worksheet. And everybody should have peer debriefing, somebody checking your thinking. And this peer debriefer is the one that is your colleague, and you say, hey, I found this in the data today. And they go, really? Show me a piece of data. If you can't show them a piece of data that convinces them of what you're seeing, then you can't say it. They're checking you to make sure it's really in the data. And if you can't produce data that convinces them that this trend is happening, then it's not happening. That's keeps it objective. And so you're going to have a peer debriefer. So peer debriefing is one of your techniques. Triangulation is definitely going to be another one. Member checks. This is where you check another reality check on this time it's one of your participants. Somebody who's in the data, and you're saying, here's what I'm seeing as a trend. Can you tell me more about that? And they can tell you whether, yeah, that matches reality, or no, that's not really happening, and here's why. Again, that goes towards being objective. And you have to go through, one more detail. It's the detailed description of context. The more descriptive you are, the more likely it is that what you're seeing is real, and that the ideas being, for the reader, the ideas are transferable from your research, from your setting to their setting, if the description of the context has some overlap. And if it doesn't, if they're not similar, then they can't say that this is likely to get the same kind of result. So you have to give a sufficiently thick description. Okay, so answer these questions, and this one, if you don't know those terms, go figure it out quickly. It's certainly in your textbook from the research class, which you should have kept, but they're also just out there everywhere. And you can match each one of these to at least one of these 4 areas of trustworthiness. Okay, so participant selection process. Remember, in qualitative, we do very purposeful selection. So what is the way you're identifying? So I talked to folks today who are looking at the return on investment for dollars spent per student on fine arts in a district, and they're using test scores comparing to the investment per student, and figuring out who's getting the biggest return on investment. That's not the research. That's how they're selecting the participants. They're going to select 2 districts that are doing really well, getting the most bang for the buck. And that's how they're selecting, and that's what they would describe in this box. And so that makes total sense, because she's looking for effective ways to have fine arts support the academic learning side. And so it's that return on investment's a big important idea, and that makes sense. And how many participants? Well, you estimate. You're not going to know exactly necessarily. And so that's good enough for now. And what are the limitations, and how does that affect that it's trustworthy? Okay, limitations, her selection process isn't going to look at the worst ones. It's not going to look at 80 school districts with good return on investment. So that's going to limit generalizability, but of course it's a qualitative study. Generalizability is not one of the goals, but it is a limitation when you look at it that way. But it's also a great strength because she's going to go interview the key people and find out why it's working, why they're having a positive impact with less money. So going in and with fine tooth with just a small sampling is a weakness and a strength. Okay, so that was it, and that's just information shared on the last page. You should look at that. But that is how you're going to fill out the qualitative analysis worksheet. I will do another video which is on the quantitative. So, good job, and let's